Morning and welcome to the second panel of the Middle East and North Africa Future Energy and Decarbonisation Summit. My name is Richard Thompson. I am the editorial director of MEED and I will be the moderator for this panel. So over the next hour, we're going to look at hydrogen and the question we're going to try and answer is hydrogen the missing piece of the jigsaw in the development of a decarbonised economy. Hydrogen fuel, it promises abundant new reliable sources of energy, developing hydrogen from other molecules, whether it's through electrolysis from water into hydrogen or other processes, and in particular the development of green hydrogen, so using renewable energy or renewable energy sources to provide the power to generate hydrogen. That's the goal that we're aiming for: sustainable and green and clean hydrogen fuel. However, the cost of developing green hydrogen is still high, and the technology is still new. So there are plenty of challenges on the technical and on the financing and commercial side, and as we will hear, also on the regulatory side as well. So the purpose of this panel is to talk about the potential of hydrogen as the missing piece of a decarbonised economy, where we are in the development of hydrogen, where the investments are happening, where the research is happening, and what we can expect in the coming years in the Middle East and North Africa in terms of hydrogen fuel. So we have a fantastic panel joining us today. Each of them is bringing a huge amount of expertise, but from a slightly different perspective. On screen at the moment, we have Dr. Roland Roesch. He is the Deputy Director for Innovation and Technology, or for the Innovation and Technology Centre at IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. Good morning, Roland. You're dialing in from Germany, so it's very early for you. Thank you very much for doing that. I'm also delighted that we are joined by Frank Wouters. He is the Director for the EU GCC Clean Energy Network based down in Abu Dhabi. And I would like personally to find out a little bit more about the EU GCC Clean Energy Network, as well as hearing Frank's thoughts on the hydrogen topic. Manuel Kuehn is the Head of New Energy for the Middle East and North Africa at Siemens Energy, one of the biggest tech companies in the world and really leading the development of tech in the hydrogen space. Now, Manuel is not on screen at the moment. He will be joining us through the conversation, and I will introduce him when he arrives. And last but certainly not least, we have Dan Feldman, who is a partner at the international law firm Shearman and Sterling, who will bring a legal perspective on the conversation. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. I would just like to say, before we sort of get into the topic, for all of you who are watching the panel, you can submit questions live to the panelists using the stage tab on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can send questions, and once we get through the introductory comments, I'll try and moderate those questions to the panelists. So please get involved. This is a very important topic, and it will be great to hear your thoughts. And I'm sure you all have questions as well. So you can use click on the stage tab on the right-hand side, and then the chat sort of sub-tab to send in your questions. Right, so let's get on with the conversation. Dr. Roland Roesch, I'm going to come to you first. You're the Deputy Director for the Innovation and Technology Centre at IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. Roland, if you could just perhaps tell us a little bit about what IRENA is doing in the development of hydrogen in terms of research and other advisory that you do. And then perhaps let's get into the topic itself about where we are and what we need to do to develop hydrogen as a clean fuel. So tell us a little bit about IRENA.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for the introduction, Richard. Good morning from Germany, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's very nice to be here this morning to discuss about the possibilities of hydrogen. Of course, IRENA, with its membership of 162 member countries and 62 countries very active on the topic of hydrogen, represents the views from a green hydrogen, since we are the International Renewable Energy Agency. So, and there is growing recognition across the globe for the need to take bold action in response to climate emergency. A key challenge is decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, including industry, aviation, and shipping in the transport sector. IRENA's work indicates that green hydrogen produced from renewable power could become a game changer, complementing electrification and energy efficiency as key pillars in these efforts. It has several distinct advantages. So hydrogen, the advantages of hydrogen are: first, green hydrogen can become competitive due to the rapid and continuing decline in renewable electricity costs, leading to more cost-effective hydrogen production. Second, electrolyzer can provide flexibility to the power system, particularly through much needed seasonal storage, while enabling the integration of higher shares of renewables. The third, green hydrogen does not have residual greenhouse gas emissions, unlike other production pathways. Last but not least, being able to convert renewable energy to gas when needed along the supply chain allows us to use the most efficient combination of technology and assets that we have for the least disruption to people and the environment for a faster decarbonization. But let's say the largest impact on its costs, or costs of hydrogen, of the renewable electricity needed to run electrolysis plants that splits the water to produce hydrogen. So let's say the costs are extremely important. So, and one of the major challenges are the costs, and currently green hydrogen is on average 2 to 3 times more expensive than low hydrogen from fossil fuels. And it is important to bring down the cost of the electrolyzers to close the gap between the cost of gray hydrogen and green hydrogen. And this cost reduction in the electrolyzers can be achieved through a combination of 4 strategies, as we see in IRENA. So we need innovation to improve the performance of the electrolyzer and have designs free from rare materials. Economies of scale by increasing the module size and reducing cost contribution from the balance of plant and auxiliary equipment. Cost is not the only driver for module size, and the specific application will have a large role in the trade-off. Economics of scale can also be achieved during the manufacturing of stacks. Achieving a scale of around 1 gigawatt per year could already lead to an automated manufacturing and a reduction of the fixed costs per unit manufactured. Also important is standardizing the design, optimizing the supply chain, replicating installation, and learning from best practices in deployment. If we follow this direction, then we are at IRENA very sure we will bring down the costs. Then we stay, and let's say it's very important to create enabling frameworks which will be critical to realize the potential of green hydrogen. These measures are described in a report we launched in November, Green Hydrogen, a Guide to Policy Making. This and a report on electrolyzer costs you will find on IRENA webpage under www.irena.org. So let's say on the policy side, it's very important that we are developing national hydrogen strategies. So these strategies can define the level of ambition and serve as a reference for private actors to attract the financing into the hydrogen industry and economy. Second pillar is setting priorities. Green hydrogen can be utilized in a wide range of end users to avoid diluting efforts. Policymakers should identify and prioritize the applications that provide the highest value. For example, industry and the hard to abate sectors before low-grade heat. The third pillar focuses on introducing guarantees of origin. So this is our pure interest also of IRENA, to make sure that green hydrogen really comes from renewable energy sources. So
Roland, if I can just ask you,
should account for the whole life cycle carbon emission of hydrogen. They should provide a clear label to increase consumer awareness and can be used to claim incentives. And then last but not least, enabling policies. Policymakers should make sure to create the ecosystem for green hydrogen to create industrial, economic, and social value, including jobs. So these are my main points I wanted to share here with you in the introduction. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Roland. I mean, a very comprehensive set of points, and all of them very important. If I can just go back to the first point, or the first group of points about costs. You said that currently hydrogen, and I presume you're talking about green hydrogen here, is
yes,
about 2 or 3 times more expensive than the clean fossil fuels, I think you were saying. Point is, it has to come down by about 200 or 300% in terms of costs. And you outlined various areas, particularly around the economies of scale. How is it possible to say how far off getting that cost reduction we are? So on photovoltaic cells, for example, the costs have came down over the last 5 years massively. Are we at that point with green hydrogen? Do you expect to see these competitive pricings in the market in the next 5 years?
So what let's say, since IRENA is working on hydrogen, of course, arenas with the private sector and also with policymakers. And so IRENA established a collaborative framework with 62 member countries, experts from 62 member countries, but also with the private sector, the Hydrogen Council, the World Economic Forum, and also the International Partnership on Hydrogen and Fuel Cells. So we have these partnerships and a lot of private sector players. And while I was saying this may happen, let's say, towards 2030 or even later, we have now indications from the discussion with the private sector that the prices will come down much more rapidly as originally expected. And there are some key players now looking into the opportunities to already trade hydrogen. So for instance, the Germans have closed an agreement with the Moroccan to export green hydrogen into Europe. And there is different initiatives from the private sector, let's say on the Italian side with Enel, but also on the Belgium side with Engie, French side with Engie and Fluxys. And there are strong indications that already in 5 years' time, we will see the possibilities to deal with green hydrogen. And let's say, I have been with IRENA while we have seen how quickly the costs for solar came down unexpectedly. And let's say the momentum feels like the same. The private sector is onboarding the opportunities. We have statements and interests of countries to trade and be part in the trading, let's say, every day. And I see there is a lot of effort starting now to look into the certification guarantees of origin. There is a lot of research money put in, let's say, discussed so at the Clean Ministerial Mission Innovation. So there is a huge momentum to bring the costs down faster. And I'm very optimistic that we are going and achieve something that was unexpected 2 years ago. So maybe in 3-4 years, 5 years, we will have first results to this. And
Very
of
good.
course, there are interims and bridging solutions. So
Yeah.
that's for discussion how they play a role, but also purple hydrogen and blue hydrogen will have a role to play in this decision making and ramping up. And IRENA expects that till 2050, let's say 2/3 green hydrogen will be in place and will play a major role in the energy sector transformation, but also blue hydrogen and purple hydrogen will have a role to play here. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. Now, you've mentioned there, the sort of it's not a sudden switch over. There's going to be a gradual transition, and there are different forms of hydrogen that will play a role. In your earlier comments, you said developing national hydrogen strategies is a very important aspect of this. I'm curious, because this is the Middle East and North Africa Future Energy and Decarbonisation Summit, where is the Middle East, or the Middle East countries, where are they in developing national hydrogen strategies? I mean, do they exist at all?
Of course, let's say I have to say in the past 6 months, a lot of countries, amongst them the European Union and the Germans, they kind of defined very clear targets for hydrogen and green hydrogen, also on electrolyzer capacities. And what I see, there is a lot of movement in the Middle East also. And I think also exporters of oil and gas in the Middle East see an advantage in becoming part of the players in this field. And they are also exploring the opportunities to set targets. And I'm sure Frank can talk more about this, since he is in GCC. But let's say what we see, the Middle East countries, amongst them the United Arab Emirates, but also Saudi Arabia and others like Qatar, are extremely active in this area. They are part of the discussion. They are listening in. They make clear statements that they have projects, that they build huge projects that are known in the region to be part of this. And I assume we will see a lot of developments in this region soon to have very concrete targets. There are targets already in place, but of course not mainly driven by green hydrogen. There are other plans also produced based on gas, which is normal. So this is a region of gas and oil exporters, but they are aware of the transition and they just start from the other end. And I think we will see targets, and being that these countries take up their role, and this is that since we are hosted in the United Arab Emirates, they very, very committed to explore the options with renewables and to bring down their CO2 emission footprint and play a role as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Roesch. So if any of you have questions for Roland, who is the Deputy Director for the Innovation and Technology Centre at the International Renewable Energy Agency, get your questions in. You can use the tabs on the right-hand side, and we will try and field those questions to Roland. Now, we'll move on to Frank Wouters now. So Frank is the Director of the EU GCC Clean Energy Network based in Abu Dhabi, and just following directly on from those last comments by Roland about the need for national strategies, etc. Frank, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the EU GCC Clean Energy Network. What is it? What's it doing? And then what are your thoughts on the development of hydrogen in the region and that comment about national strategies?
Yes, thanks, Richard, and I'm glad to be here today. The network was established in 2010. So last year, we had planned a lot of activities for the lustrum. Obviously, that didn't take place physically, but we're still hoping to do something this year. But so more than 11 years or more than 10 years, we have been fostering partnerships between Europe and the Gulf, and that's actually building on the long-standing relationship that Europe has with the Gulf. And obviously, energy is an important part of the relationships. I mean, Europe is a net importer of energy. 54% of primary energy in Europe is imported. It's natural gas from Russia, but liquids from the Gulf, and obviously also increasing amounts of LNG. And it was important to keep the dialogue open, and that's why the GCC Secretary General and the European Commission came together and said, let's establish this network. We have been given funding from the European Commission in 3 consecutive periods, and we're very happy with that. And with that, we can actually, do what we do, bring people together and exchange experiences, best practices, etc. Now, when the new European Commission came into power a year and a half ago, their first, or one of their flagship initiatives was, of course, the Green Deal. And last year, every year we have in Riyadh the IEF, the International Energy Forum, EU Energy Day. And last year, the European Commission asked me to go and explain what the Green Deal is. So, basically it's a fundamental shift away from hydrocarbons to anything else. And it's like going to the butcher and explaining that you want to become a vegetarian. It's not something that it's immediately understandable in the region, and people think, what are they going to do without hydrocarbons, etc. So that wasn't an easy task. And I think what we have seen in the meantime is a growing understanding of a number of things. First of all, even if you fully decarbonize Europe's energy system, which enables you and allows you to produce green electricity on the continent, and with green electricity, as we've heard, you can make green hydrogen and all kinds of things. Still, the continent is pretty densely populated. And also the renewable resource has limitations. I mean, there's just places close by. Roland mentioned Morocco, where you have a lot more space. Solar energy is much better. So it just, it allows for cheaper production of these new molecules and also electrons, and then send them to Europe. So the realization is there that Europe also in a future decarbonized energy system will remain a net importer. And, this is becoming now part of the narrative. Germany is actively engaging in discussions with many countries, to think about, future relationships with, green molecules. And the European Commission as a whole is also pursuing that. And this is this has given the energy discussion between Europe and the Gulf a completely new impetus. And we had an event last month with Sohaila Mazrouei, the UE Energy Minister. We had Kadri Simpson, the EU Energy Commissioner, and this was actually the first time at that level where we were able to discuss the future of the energy relationship between Europe and the Gulf, and that will, to a large extent, evolve around hydrogen, both green as well as blue. I mean, as Roland already said, the region is blessed. If you look at Abu Dhabi, if you look at Saudi, we have very low-cost hydrocarbons, but equally low-cost renewable energy. So this is actually a great place to look at these things and start developing that industry. And we've seen that. We see that with NEOM in Saudi Arabia, a fantastic new project. But we also see that, of course, with Manuel's project in Dubai, but now Abu Dhabi is ramping up hydrogen activities, both blue and green. So we see a lot of momentum in the region towards that. Oman is developing several projects at scale. So,
how do you see, Frank? Do you see the sort of relationship between the GCC and the EU in terms of hydrogen? Do you see that around investment in physical infrastructure, so transmission networks for electricity or pipelines for hydrogen gas, or do you see it about technology collaboration, or how do you see that relationship developing in the context of hydrogen?
Yeah, that's a number of things. I mean, if you, I mentioned NEOM. So NEOM, a new city-state in the northwestern corner of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They call it a city, but it's 26,000 square kilometers, the size of Belgium. And they have embarked on a pretty ambitious green hydrogen journey, where they're now working on the engineering of a project which will produce 1.2 million tons of green ammonia. based on 2.2 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. And even though the investors, Air Products, Aqua Power from Saudi, Air Products is an American company, and NEOM are not from Europe, all the kit is from Europe. The wind turbines will be European, the electrolyzers will be European, and the ammonia loop will be European. Probably the solar panels will come from China, but all the other stuff is European. So that's a very direct angle, and I think Manuel will explain that a little bit further how that works. And then if you're then looking at additional capacities also in the blue hydrogen space, where you have to deploy carbon capture and storage solutions, again, Europe has a lot to offer in that space. So I think the initial technology angle will be to a large extent Europe. It's for Europe to lose that market.
Okay, thanks. And one final question before I move on to Manuel. You mentioned in your opening comments that going to Riyadh to talk about decarbonization was a bit like going to the butcher and telling him you're a vegetarian. What does, if I sort of take that point in the serious context that it was meant, is there a political will? The decarbonization of the economy obviously is a major change for the world's leading oil and gas producers. And we get a lot of positive comments about it from this region, renewable energy, decarbonization. But is there really the political will to kind of accelerate their own demise as the sources of global energy?
Well, I mean, I think that your first question, yes. Your second comment, your last comment, demise. Again, this is an opportunity. So and I think there is growing recognition that this is an avenue, to be part of the energy of the future. Because there's no reason. I mean, you have the lowest cost solar energy in this region. You have an intellectual and physical infrastructure available to make these big projects. I mean, we're heavily industrialized in the GCC, much more than global average. So there is no reason why you can't do that, and why this region wouldn't become a hub for global export of green fuels, like we are with hydrocarbons right now. And just to give you one more data point, on Thursday we have another EU Energy Day at the IEF. And this time I'll be speaking, but not, I won't have to explain the Green Deal, because the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, will be speaking. So we've actually, increased the level of participation. The Energy Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will be there. The Egyptian Minister will be there. So that level is also increasing, and it will be about the circular carbon economy. It will be about green fuels and all of the things of the future.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, we have some questions that have come in. I'm going to keep the questions once we've finished going around the panelists for some keynote thoughts, but keep your questions coming in, because I can see from the ones that have come in, they're very good and challenging questions, and will help help inform the conversation. I want to move now to Manuel Kuehn, who is the head of new energy for the Middle East and Africa for Siemens Energy. Now, Siemens is one of the great names of sort of energy technology for, I don't know how old they are, but certainly it must be over 100 years old. And they're certainly leading in the terms of hydrogen technology. So, Manuel, if you can tell us a little bit about Siemens, Siemens in the hydrogen field, but also I'm quite interested in following up on Roland's points about costs, and I'm guessing that Siemens is right in there looking at reducing costs and developing the technology. So tell us a little bit about what your take on hydrogen, green hydrogen is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Richard. Apologies for joining 2 minutes late. I had to fix a network issue. It's more than 170 years actually, that the age of Siemens. So obviously the whole matter of decarbonization and how hydrogen and green hydrogen plays a role in decarbonization of energy systems is big on our agenda, since Siemens Energy covers the whole value chain, and now with also having own electrolyzers technology in the portfolio, we can definitely connect the dots. So For us, the whole matter of decarbonization spans beyond just producing hydrogen. It's the question where the electricity comes from, how you integrate in the grids, and how the hydrogen is then later applied, be it in a utility sector or in industries. What I would like to connect, what was already mentioned before, is that, I mean, we need to gradually change our way of thinking on this whole matter to think in changing ecosystems. We have a number of new players coming into this field that maybe are established in the respective industry. Hydrogen isn't new in industrial applications, at least what we call gray hydrogen. But we bring this technology in new application fields. So we will bring it into environments where it hasn't been before. And that creates a lot of questions from a regulatory, from a safety side. Also a lot of topics on it's people basically that needs to be educated so that they can make the right decisions. And I get to that in a moment, what I mean in detail with this. So we have a lot of new players and applications. And then we have the established players that will have to reposition themselves. We mentioned already the big oil companies. They will definitely play a big role. There is no pushing out the big oil out of this topic, because we will need the big oil in this transition, because the infrastructure for half of what we want to do is already there. The people with the competence, they are already there. The existing exporting and importing relationships, they're already there. And specifically in the Middle East, that's the biggest advantage that the region has, is that we can bank on these existing infrastructures and competences to bring this in this decarbonized world. So we are in a process of trying to managing this transition in a changing ecosystem. So for me, the question is, like, how will this transition happen? Yeah? And our focus is mainly on getting the first projects on the ground, because I strongly believe that nothing beats operational experience. You only learn what you can do wrong once you tried it. So we went actually a couple of years back already in the context of the Expo in Dubai and started to establish a plan together with Expo and DEWA in Dubai. It's for what we discussed today, a small one. For 3.5 years back when we started with this was a pretty crazy endeavor that we put on the paper. And we are still in the commissioning, but I'm quite positive that we get it up and running in the next couple of weeks. And that would be for us the first industrial scale plant that runs. And as we went on this journey together with our partners, we learned quite a lot on what it means to bring this technology in the Middle Eastern environment. And that goes beyond obvious things like cooling system adjustments.
Manuel, if I can just interject, on that project, I realize it's not commissioned yet, but is it possible to sort of say what are the biggest lessons, in terms of developing hydrogen energy or hydrogen fuel? What are the sort of takeaways from that project so far?
Yeah, first of all, one of the takeaways is that we bring in of course we have to get a lot of companies, suppliers, certifiers involved in such a project. So even simple things like safety assessments haven't been done on a solar plant environment. I mean, we're building the plant close to the Mohammed bin Rashid Solar Park, so it's not an oil and gas environment, but we are, in the absence of having a better idea, the tendency is to apply, for example, oil and gas standards to this plant. But that's not the way how you designed this area before. Yeah? So we have a lot of kind of glitches where we have explicitly or implicitly different assumptions on what is the kind of, where are we now? Yeah, is this an oil and gas plant? Is this a solar field? Is this a utility area? And the biggest learning for me is that you have to spend a lot of time in making sure that everybody works in the same frame of reference, because everybody comes from a different origin, and you just go with the assumptions that were true for you before, but you are in a different environment with different people on the table. So there is a lot of talking required in order to make sure that we really know what we're talking about. And these things all will be solved. Eventually they will all be solved. The question is how much time you have to figure it all out.
Sorry to interrupt again. I think this is a very interesting and very important point. And we have had a question that I think relates to this. It's come in from one of our audience about localization. And I think it relates to what you're saying. How can we help local companies to participate in this technology besides using local manpower experience and develop this experience to play a role in this field? So I'm sort of joining the dots from what you just said about everyone talking the same, you know, on the same textbook, but local capacity, the local drive, the regional drive to develop local capacity, that relates to this. So do you have any thoughts on that? Is there a scope to create a local hydrogen industry?
This will definitely happen. The question is, in which order is this going to happen? So one very nice initiative, for example, is Geotech in Oman. Yeah, they went very far ahead and into setting up a hydrogen chair. So have this very strong cooperation with academia, for example, with a very good focus on getting people from Oman trained on the technology. Yet there is, however, no project in Oman where you can directly apply. So the challenge is that we bring all these things in sequence. I need a project to get people in that learn. And for the time being, I'm also dependent on bringing experts from outside into the countries, which isn't really easy in these days, in order to get certain things done. So as we are looking in an environment where travel restrictions, I'm not so optimistic that we get rid of this so soon. Yeah, they will be there. On the other hand, we will see more and more projects coming. The projects will be spread about many countries, because one beauty of the whole hydrogen idea is that we will see much more decentralized systems. There are many more places that allow for production of green hydrogen. So we are absolutely in need to get competencies in the local markets for people that are here, yeah? Not only for logistics, but also to bring this industry into swing and to really do good for the long term.
Well, on that point, there is another question, which is, I think, again, it follows on from exactly what you said. There are a lot of oil and gas engineering companies in this region. Do you have any advice or suggestions on opportunities for these companies to replace what they're doing with this, either with this technology or to work in this field? You know, what sort of things should they think about to transition from the old economy to the new economy?
Yeah, I think that to some degree also applies for ourselves, right? Because we also come very much from the fossil-based electricity generation as Siemens, so we are running the same thing internally as what I would advise externally as well. You have to build core teams where you can kind of allocate these competences close to where the markets and the projects are. That's a given if it's a local company in oil and gas. But then also we have to make sure that you get a small number of experts that really spend the time to dig into the matter, that spend time into thinking, how can I transition the competence that I have in the industry that is about to emerge? Because also, you know, if you do it with too many people and too shallow, it doesn't do any good. At the end, we need to get something done in the project. So I rather say my advice is take few people and go deep, because this will allow you to actually get problem solved. Yeah.
Okay, Manuel, thank you very much for your comments. I'll come back to you with some more questions shortly. For everyone watching, please keep your questions coming. We've got loads coming in, and I want to get through as many as we can. But before we go to those, I'm going to go to Dan Feldman. Dan is a partner at Shearman and Sterling, the international law firm, and thank you, Dan, for your patience this morning. I saw you nodding your head when Manuel was speaking about, you know, the need to get everyone talking the same language, technical language, and, you know, in the same framework. So maybe you can just, if it sounds like it looked like you might have an observation to make there from a legal perspective. But then beyond that, how relevant is hydrogen to you? What does it mean from a regulatory, contractual, legal point of view?
Sure. Thanks very much, Richard. I mean, at Shearman, I think we see hydrogen as being, you know, one of, if not the next major super cycle of major projects globally. And, you know, Frank was talking earlier about the NEOM project, which is the world's largest project, and we've been advising NEOM on that project for a year now. It's a very important project for the region and for the world, because it's the first world-scale green hydrogen project, and you know, it involves aside from anything else, the world's largest single-phase renewables project, as well as the world's largest hydrogen project. And it's going to be on stream in 2025. So, it's very, very relevant to us to be coming on stream into a world where the regulatory and legal environment is in place, that there's a market for the product, but also that ultimately, there's a real ecosystem around hydrogen. And as Frank said, NEOM is very focused on being one of the world leaders there. In this sort of classic chicken and egg situation that we've got, where everybody is predicting that hydrogen will be big 2025, 2030, but ultimately investment decisions need to be made today in order to be ready for that demand to be supplied. And in order to get ready for it, we need to be structuring projects in a way that can attract investment, that can attract finance, and that ultimately people feel confident, that they're putting their checks on the line into an investment that makes sense. So from our point of view at Shearman, we are very interested in these projects because we love to be at the forefront of new cycles, new technologies, new structures, and we really see hydrogen as bringing together a series of very complex individual parts that need a lot of sort of magic sauce to make work together. You have the renewables part, you have the hydrogen part, where, as mentioned, there are sort of legacies to be taken from the oil and gas industry, and yet trying to move forward in a progressive way to take account of new technology. And then you're trying to stretch that to a downstream distribution, transportation, and ultimately retail system that doesn't yet exist. So all of that, from the perspective of a lawyer, is extremely, extremely interesting. And the opportunity for us to work on a project like that is really exciting. The firm...
If I can just ask you about setting up the projects, it was interesting that you made that comment, because my perception of projects in this region is that they are driven through very hard commercial bargaining, and price is generally the primary driver. Now we're dealing with new technology, as we heard from Roland earlier, and from Manuel actually. The need to create new ecosystems and new skills and new capacities. So price is going to be a problem, isn't it, in terms of if that's the only way we set up these projects? Is there a need to set our hydrogen project up differently, where the outputs of the project are not just about the commercials, they're also about developing the technology? Is a new type of thinking needed for setting up these projects?
So I think that goes partly to the financing structures that you use and the financing sources that you use for the projects. I mean, ultimately, all projects need to be commercially feasible. And in order to be commercially feasible, people need to see a market that ultimately is going to purchase the output of the project for more than it costs to produce. That's a difficult thing to do in an environment where there is currently no market, at least not one where you can easily point to a sort of history of pricing or anything like that. And therefore, you are, as a developer of a project like this, trying to anticipate, based on your understanding of the costs that are going to apply in all the potential competitor producing markets, what would be competitive. As a first mover, which this project is, you would hope that the demand in the early years, when you are the first project out in the market able to supply it, will be such that whilst your initial costs may be what they are, nevertheless, you're going to be able to capitalize on that first mover advantage. And on the other hand, you would hope that you would have, you would be part of the process of building up the manufacturing capacity on the equipment side in order to, essentially helping manufacturers scale up and get ready to be able to supply. So, you have a privileged position there. And you would also hope that ultimately you would be, closely involved in decision-making discussions about regulations that might impact the project. So, as a first mover in any new industry, you are in a combination of trying to predict the future whilst trying to manage the costs and the regulations and so on that are still developing around you. So from our point of view as lawyers, what we're trying to do is help clients predict those things based on our sort of experience from all over the world. And our global team focused on hydrogen has partners looking at this in, Japan, Korea, Latin America, Germany, France, all over the world. And so what's important is to bring all the experience together and bring it to bear so that a project based in the Middle East understands what's happening in those different jurisdictions and how to position itself ultimately to target to be able to sell products in those jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. Now, we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to get through the questions that have come in. If any of you have questions for Dan or any of our other panelists on the topic of hydrogen, please send them in using the chat tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Roland, if I can come to you first, I'm just going to go through the questions, so the sequencing will be a bit random, but I'll come to you first. The question is, GCC countries seem to want to use more blue hydrogen in order to avoid stranded gas reserves. Is this an acceptable intermediate solution from a renewables perspective to support creating sufficient supply of hydrogen to develop the market? Or do you think it might delay the development of green hydrogen? You are on mute, Roland.
Sorry. Yes, of course, I'm representing the International Renewable Energy Agency. So for us, a green hydrogen is the right stuff, and that's our vision. But also to be clear, I have shown that there is still a gap in costs and also in policy making to get this go. And also IRENA believes that we will have a certain amount of blue hydrogen in the energy transition. And let's say in this sense, blue hydrogen is also playing in all these aspects I've mentioned. There is some kind of technology improvements, also the use of certain materials, and also, let's say, scaling up. So the infrastructure for hydrogen is not yet in place. And let's say to build the hydrogen infrastructure, to bring down the cost, to bring, let's say, the right policy in place, and to find the way into international hydrogen trading and create the structures, the certification, the guarantees of origin and all these things. Let's say it's not going to start from the end of green hydrogen only. And there are a blue hydrogen and also, let's say, purple hydrogen, let's say, produced partly with electricity coming from green hydrogen production, from renewable power generators, is an avenue we have to see, and that's very likely. So let's say playing together to achieve the clean energy transition and to decarbonize.
Okay.
Blue hydrogen has a role to create.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's very clear. There is an important role in the transition for blue hydrogen. I'm going to rattle through the questions now, so I apologize if I'm cutting people off a little bit. Frank, we have a question. What are the drivers and benefits for importing and exporting ZCS, such as hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol from the MENA region to Europe?
Yeah, I think the main driver is probably cost. So if you look at producing green, hydrogen, and it would be the same equation for green ammonia in the Sahara Desert, in a place in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. You're just a lot cheaper than in Europe. And then if you add, typically half $1 per kilo for transport, whether that's a pipe or a ship, there's not a huge difference. You're still cheaper than producing it in Germany with mediocre solar or wind. That's on average just not as good in some of these better locations. So I think in the end it's going to be cost that's going to drive international trade for these.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Frank, I can see that there's been a number of questions that you've answered in the chat box on the right-hand side, but there's one here. I think I'd like to put this to Manuel. I apologize, Manuel, if this isn't one for you, but I think it might be. So in the making of blue hydrogen, the associated production of carbon dioxide, is it 100% captured and injected underground? If that's true, would that make blue hydrogen as green hydrogen? Is that a question for Siemens? I don't know if that's appropriate or not.
Yeah, I can give you a high level answer. No, it's not 100%. But don't ask me on the details because there are specialists to do that. Even if it's not 100%, and that's my opinion on the matter, it doesn't change anything on the argument whether blue hydrogen has a role as a transitional green fuel or blue fuel in order to push the offtakes, yeah, and to make viable make the offtake markets viable until the green hydrogen costs go down. I think this is there are two major arguments to that, and whether now you have actually 75 or 85 or 87% sequestration rate, that doesn't change anything on this argument. For me, the key question is how pragmatic do we allow us to be during this transition? Because this blue hydrogen discussion is exactly a question about pragmatism. And we have, by the way, similar topics when we talk about green. Let's take water. The water that comes out of the tap in the Middle East is definitely not carbon free. And it will not be very soon. So who says that there is no carbon footprint associated to green hydrogen production in the Middle East? That's also not 100% correct. You know, if you open the box, you will find a lot of questions to be answered. And now, for me, I think what counts is that we preserve us a certain amount of pragmatism in order to get things done. If we want to be too dogmatic on everything and make sure everything is a zero carbon, we will just lose a lot of time. Which, looking at the bigger picture, which is climate change, I believe we don't have. So my pledge would be leave all the options open and let the markets decide what is commercially viable and just get it done. 70% sequestration is better than nothing. Do it, yeah, and then make sure that we adjust the policies as we go, so that this effect that was mentioned before, that investments in existing or the blue hydrogen, for example, do not cannibalize the emergence of the, let's say, fully decarbonized industry. That's of course a problem, but that's something that can be easily fixed by very wise and gradually adjusted policy decisions.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Dan, Roland, when he was talking, talked about the need to create, and Manuel just mentioned this as well, the need to create a sort of industrial ecosystem to support the development of the hydrogen economy or the green hydrogen economy. So what does that mean to you? Does that mean we need a regulatory body, a ministry, some sort of financing mechanisms? You know, what will help enable this ecosystem to start attracting investment?
Yeah, I want to answer that by going back to what Manuel was saying, because I think he really hit the nail on the head. In order for this industry, which is inherently going to be a global industry of exports and imports, you know, we need a unified understanding of what counts as green. And it may be that there are different levels of greenness in different markets that are acceptable. Some markets will accept hydrogen produced in a certain way, whether it be blue, you know, that will count as green, at least for a time. And it may as well be that different levels of carbon introduced in the process of developing the hydrogen and transportation are acceptable in different countries. And you will then you will target those markets depending on the configuration of your project and the pricing of your product. Similar to what we see in the gasoline market, where you have different, you know, over time, different standards for diesel, different standards for gasoline. It was originally leaded, then it was unleaded. You know, it may be that there is a similar sort of development that we're expecting here. Nuclear hydrogen is a super important one. I mean, you know, hydrogen produced from nuclear energy does not release any carbon. Does that count as green? Very important for a place like the UAE. So, I mean, I think, you know, there are a whole lot of questions that remain completely unanswered. And therefore, in order to structure a project today, the only way to do it is to be hyper conservative, to assume, as Manuel said, that everyone's going to be super dogmatic. and that you're going to have, next to zero carbon in your project. That increases the price of production. It also means you'll be able to target the most conservative countries. So there are pros and cons and all sorts of different sort of balancing issues here. For me, the one thing that would really give a juice to the system here would be some kind of policy coming out of Europe that very clearly states and is adopted by all European countries exactly what we mean by green hydrogen, what will qualify both for hydrogen produced inside Europe as well as imported to Europe. And I think if we get that, we will start to get other countries around the world following along and adopting the same sort of thing in Asia, in the US, and so on. Then we will have a truly global understanding of what green hydrogen is and what we should all be targeting with the development of our projects.
Okay, thank you. Now, Frank, you've been answering a lot of questions on the chat box on the right-hand side, and for anyone who wants to get into some of the detail, please scroll down through the chat box. There is a lot of data. Could you briefly summarize? I see a lot of the conversation you've been having is around costs, the cost of hydrogen in comparison to other fuels. Could you, sorry to sort of ask you to summarize it off the top of your head. Can you just go through what you've been saying and where we are with costs?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a cost gap. So first of all, we need to see what we're replacing with hydrogen, because I mean, if you're replacing natural gas is is very cheap at the moment. So there we have a bigger cost gap than if we're using green hydrogen as a transport fuel, where you're replacing gasoline or diesel. So I think those are important considerations. And an obvious one is because, if you look at Europe, we have 200,000 kilometers of natural gas pipeline infrastructure. That's the transmission grid. Europe buys gas, so there's no strategy in gas. So that's part of the reason why Europe is so ambitious in this hydrogen space, because you can make hydrogen yourself. You replace something that you buy from potentially not even your friends, and you can choose whom to buy from in the future. So I think that's the strategy behind hydrogen. And then the question is, okay, what are the costs and how do you get the cost down? I think if you take the parallel to photovoltaics, there's what we call a learning curve, which is round about, I think, between 20 and 23%. So if you double capacity of production and offtake, you go down with the cost to that extent. Even though the body of evidence for electrolysis is still very small, and we're actually we're at the start of the production, it seems to be around 18.5%. So if we double capacity, if we go from 1 gigawatt to 2 gigawatts, etc., every time you can reduce the cost by 18.5%. And then you get into the same situation that you're going into an increasing competitive situation. You'll be able to replace more applications. The more you do it, the cheaper it gets. And at the moment, I mean, we've seen solar at the moment in a good location. Solar is by far per unit of generation the cheapest form of electricity. Nothing beats solar. I mean, we've seen Abu Dhabi 1.35 cents. The next project will be probably below 1 cent. And I think this is the dynamic with electrolysis. I mean, it's all technology, and the more you make it, the cheaper it gets. It's like your cell phone. It's like your flat screen. Things that you make, the more you make them, the cheaper. Does
that mean it's all going to come from China in 10 years down the line, like photovoltaic cells?
I mean, Manuel makes electrolyzers both in Germany as well as in China, I think, in 10 years. And yes, who knows? But it's certainly conceivable. I don't think that Europe can sit back and relax and we're the world champions in electrolysis, because if this market develops, people will start looking at it. And Chinese are good at making things. We know that.
Okay. Sorry to cut you off, Frank. I've got one question I just want to ask Dan that has come in. Is there, and we've only got a minute to go, is there an accepted standard for ensuring how CO2 life cycle emissions for hydrogen production, e.g. a guarantee of origin or something? Is there a kind of way of, I don't know, legislating?
There are certificates you can get to prove the origin of the power that you use in the production of hydrogen. So there are a number of regulatory and policy directives out there that will say to you, how do I prove that the power that went to produce my hydrogen was green power? But as Manuel said, what we don't know is how you then count what happens around the production of hydrogen. So how do you count the carbon used in the shipping? How do you count the carbon used in desalination of water? Do you count the carbon used in the concrete of the plant that is holding all this stuff? No one knows the answer to that yet. And so again, we're in that situation of kind of, being reasonably conservative about it, but trying to be pragmatic and come up with something that we believe regulators are going to be accepting around the world, as the proper count of carbon.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That sadly brings us to the end of this session. I mean, that went very quickly. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time this morning, and particularly for Roland. I mean, you had to get up very early in Germany to join us, so I really appreciate that, Roland. Thank you very much. But thank you to all of you, and thank you to you, the viewers, the audience, for joining this panel and for sending in such amazing questions.